Bienvenidos to Puentes and Possibilities, a podcast for educators, school leaders, and industry experts working to close the STEM workforce gap. My name is Zayas. I'm the author of Teaching K-5 Science, encouraging exploration, inquiry, and problem solving. My book launches on April 7th, and each week, from now until the book launch, I'd love to invite you to join me for some sneak peeks into each of the chapters of the book, as well as a chance for you to hear from some very special guests who will be joining me to dive deeper into some of the major themes explored throughout the book. Welcome to Season 1, The Explorers. Each guest is intentional as they're joining in on the conversation to share their wisdom and expertise on specific themes explored in the book. I'm a firm believer in the power of community and a professional learning network. I've learned from many others along the way to get to where I am today. So these conversations are a chance for all of us to continue growing and be better able to support our students in exploring the beautiful world of elementary science. Welcome to Episode 7. Today we're going to take a sneak peek into Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is the first chapter of the final part of the book. It's called From Science to STEAM and Beyond. We'll dive deep into the various definitions used across the country for STEM, STEAM, and even STREAM, discussing shifting teacher mindset from teaching science as a siloed discipline to an interdisciplinary one. We'll weave in how to fuse career-connected learning into the science classroom, seeing science as the gateway subject to many other branches across STEM, from bridging to computer science and AI to engineering and more. I share some of my favorite educators in the field who are experts at bridging these disciplines together so you can continue growing your professional learning network or professional learning community, as my dear colleague, friend, and next guest so eloquently puts it. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our next guest. Dr. Fonz currently serves as the Teaching and Learning Coordinator for CAMI, bringing over 11 years in the K-12 space, 8 of these in the classroom, and 12 as both a district digital learning coordinator and district assessment coordinator. He is the host of My EdTech Life, a podcast with over 350 episodes and 110,000 downloads. He holds an EDD from the UT River Grande Valley, where his dissertation explored the real-world ethics and privacy implications of AI in education. Dr. Alfonso is a cautious advocate for who believes in the power of technology, but never loses sight of what matters the most: people, trust, and learning. For our time together, there are 5 questions that we're going to discuss. Dr. Fonz, welcome. I'm so excited you're here.
I'm so excited to be here too, Coral. Thank you so much for the invite. And I know you have been a guest on my show as well. So it's an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be a guest on your show now also as you get ready to launch your book. So thank you so much for the invite.
You're so welcome. Dr. Fonz was the first person ever to give me the opportunity to come onto a podcast interview a few years ago. So this feels like such a full circle moment for me to be launching mine in part of this book launch and having him as a guest. So thank you again for being here. I'm so excited to dive in. Are you ready for your first question?
I am ready.
All right, let's do it. I would love to hear your story. Share a little bit about your background in the education field and how you're making an impact in the world of education today.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a wonderful question. And I'll just start off with this. I fell into education and I absolutely fell in love with everything about education. So my career never really started as a formal, going into formal education as far as becoming a teacher. It was actually going into marketing and business administration. So growing up, an only child, from immigrant parents coming into the US, learning English as my second language and being a language broker and seeing my parents, work hard and, just trying to do the best that they could at that time for me really kind of shaped things in the sense of saying, well, I want to go into business and marketing because I thought, I want to make money. I want to make money. I want to make sure and take care of my family and do what I can to help support them. And so I finished my bachelor's in business administration and my emphasis was in marketing. So a couple years went by, fork in the road moment. My dad falls ill. And so I needed to find a job that gave me more flexibility. I mean, the job that I was working at was almost a day a week job with so much stuff that had to be done. So I said, okay, let's see what we can do. And a friend of mine said, hey, they're needing math teachers at a high school here nearby, and you have enough math credits through all your finance. Why don't you go and see and apply and everything? So I was like, okay. So gave him a call. The assistant principal said, come on in for an interview. So that following day, I went in for an interview. My interview lasted 10 minutes. They're like, come back tomorrow, fill out your paperwork, because it turns out that the that assistant principal was the husband of a high school teacher that I had for BCIS, which is Business Computer Information Systems. And, it's just one of those moments where you're like, this was kind of meant to be. And not knowing anything about education, pedagogy, standards, nothing at all whatsoever. I go in my first day and they're like, here are two binders and I'm going to age myself full of transparencies. And I started teaching algebra. And there you go. And from then on, 20 years later, I never thought that I would be getting a master's in educational technology. And then just this past year, July the 30th, also, defended my dissertation. So now I have a doctorate in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in educational technology. So for me, education has given me so much, and working with students, and especially with the emergent bilingual population, that's really been my passion, really trying to find community between schools and parents as well, and making those connections. Of course, that led to the podcast, which you did mention at the very beginning. So we're 6 years old now, so it's amazing. 350 some episodes. Well, actually, as of today, 357 episodes, 115,000 downloads, and it has just been amazing. And, like I said, just always advocating for education and advocating for student success. And so that's where my passion lies.
I love that. And I just learned that we had another thread. I know that earlier we talked and you had also taught science at some point, and you just mentioned you'd started with algebra. I also started teaching in high school algebra and ESL. So it's so fascinating how much changes throughout our career, and how many connections we find along the way. So how fascinating that we both started in similar paths. I also came into education as not what I studied in college. So yet somehow that is exactly where I was meant to be. So it's I love hearing those kind of origin stories of how did we get to where we are today? What brought us here? So thank you for sharing that. I know that as a teacher, you were drawn to the world of edtech and technology, and I know that you've taught science before as well. So how can science teachers in particular at the elementary level create some of those meaningful STEM integrations in the science classroom by starting to leverage technology?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. With so much technology and how much it has evolved and how much it has become involved in the classroom, oftentimes what I really tell the teachers is really you need to stop thinking about technology as a separate layer. In other words, a layer on top of a lesson. I think for myself and my experience, like you mentioned, I did teach science in elementary, fifth and sixth grade, depending on where it is that they needed me for that year. So I was always alternating between fifth and sixth grade for about those, what was it, 5 years that I did in elementary. And when I did include technology into the classroom, it was really kind of like a secondary thought, in the sense that the technology was present and it was being used, but it was kind of like that invisible partner for not only myself, but for my students as we learned. The technology did not take center stage in the classroom. And I feel that oftentimes with so much that teachers see on the day to day on social media, with so many platforms that are coming out on the day to day. When they go to conferences, they see so many platforms coming out. When they go to maybe their local professional development provider at maybe a region service center, or however it is that that might work, or when they just go and have PLCs, it just seems like there's a new piece of tech, a new platform, something that is measuring something, data. And I feel that it has really taken center stage. But for STEAM, STEM, stream, all of that. Yes, technology is important to implement, but like I mentioned, it should never be that first place center stage at all. It should be that kind of invisible collaborator, co creator for teachers, for students. And so it's really using the tool to accomplish what it is that is meant to be accomplished as far as the task. So I'm going to quote Monica Burns also, who mentions in one of her books as it's always the task before the apps. Many times we're always like, well, let me see what tool I'm going to use to see what I can do with it. But it should really be like, what is the end result of that learning? And what is it that you want your students to show you as a finished product? So one of my favorite points is really one of the things that I did in my classroom, I should say, was kind of having those digital journals that we would have available. And you're talking about back in 2015, 16, 17, barely getting on the onset of Chromebooks coming into the classrooms. But we were a BYOD district. So I would do nature walks with my students. We would just kind of go outside, take pictures. They had their phones or their iPads at the time in this school district that I worked at, which it was on the south side, which it did mean that a lot of the students had access to a lot of the technology that was available at that time, but it was never really center stage. The students use that to really, like I said, observe. They would look back at what it is that they took pictures of. I would have them do presentations. I would have them do drawings, journals. They had to do a lot of presentational speaking, a lot of collaboration. And yes, the tech was involved, but what I loved about it was that it worked with those soft skills that I think are so important now as far as creativity, collaboration, those communication skills, and collaboration and so much more. And that to me was the most exciting part about using technology at that given time, where we combined so many modalities to help the students learn. And I did have a high emergent bilingual population. And I tell you what, that I saw so much growth in a lot of my emergent bilingual students due to the fact that not only were they creating with the technology, some of them were very quiet and very reserved because they felt very self conscious about the language and the pronunciation. But I tell you that once you put a Chromebook in front of them or a phone or an iPad, they spoke loudly through their creations, and they spoke very clearly that there was a understanding of the content, but they just decided to do it in that modality because they felt very scared at the time because of the language barrier. But as the year progressed, I had those digital artifacts from beginning, middle, and end of the year. And by the end of the year, a lot of my students had acquired proper vocabulary. Their language grew. And of course, because they're presenting and they're speaking, and it was just something fantastic. And again, that is something that is very important in classrooms, that the technology is not front and center, but it should be there, like I mentioned, off to the side as that co creator, co collaborator, or tool to be used to create that final product that the teacher is asking for to demonstrate learnings. That is one thing that I always tell teachers. It's really you know, take that layer off into the side and then just get into your comfort zone and just use that to, again, do the creation. And what I love about it also is, like I mentioned, at the end, you're going to have digital artifacts that can show and demonstrate that growth. So when you go into your meetings for, whether it be special education meetings, whether they be IEP meetings, 504 meetings, whatever meeting it is that you may be having, you have an artifact. You have evidence of learning, evidence of growth, and that can go a long way to demonstrating and showing how well the student may be doing. Or maybe if there are some difficulties, you can also capture those immediately, give feedback, or fix any misconceptions as well. So I'd argue that the technology is important, but it should be secondary and not front and center in our classrooms.
You added so many brilliant points there. The co-creation and the collaboration. Like, I really think that that is key and central. I remember, like, even in my journey as a teacher, always fascinated by the ed tech from the beginning. I was at the other piece of the spectrum at first. Was I want to incorporate this. How am I going to incorporate this versus the other way around? And I think that you're talking and centering us on remembering that this is a tool for us to collaborate with, co-create with as the teacher, but also for our students to be able to collaborate with this tool, co-create with this tool, and create a final product as a way of showing their means of learning. And the fact that you mentioned the digital notebooks and the nature journaling, that's actually one of the examples that I share in the book as a great entry point of how can we fuse the two. How can we go outside and nature journal and create something with the pictures and the drawings that we took outside in nature to combine it with what we're learning in the classroom. So fantastic examples and fantastic points of entry for teachers who are just now kind of thinking about how do I leverage this in a more meaningful and purposeful way. Thank you so much for that. So here's the next question that I have for you. How can teachers help their students start to see those connections between science, technology, engineering, and math? So going from science to STEM and beyond without it necessarily feeling forced.
Well, for that, honestly, I would have to say that it's going to stop feeling forced the moment the teacher stops forcing it. So, Coral, you and I have been in classrooms and we know that we have our objectives. We know that there are certain criteria that we need to meet based on our standards, based on our curriculum, things that we need to cover. And oftentimes as educators, we understand that we need to go through those things and there's certain deadlines and timelines getting students ready prior to state assessments or even weekly assessments and so on. And sometimes we lose sight. And I love what you mentioned, in the previous question that many times we are off center, where our aim is a little bit off, and we try and force everything to get done. And I think what happens is when you force things, it almost feels like, okay, so let me use this example. I know myself being, younger, yourself being younger, when your parents told you, don't do that, and they just kind of tell you, like, don't do that, you're like, you're still going to do it. Or please make sure that you do this or do that. And then you might be a little defiant and say, I'm not going to do that. So sometimes what happens is that when the nature of the lesson feels very forced, it's almost off putting. And think about yourselves too and ourselves when we sit at professional developments or PLCs, which I often sometimes call please learn compliance meetings. It feels very forced. So we feel like, ugh, like I don't want to do this or anything. But when we stop forcing it and we just really engage the students and find that common ground and help them understand that learning is not in a silo. Yes, we split up our math time from our algebra time, from our social studies time, from our reading time. But what happens is that then students silo that learning that when I used to teach science, they would go into math class and then they'd come back to me and we would be doing a little bit of math. They're like, this isn't math class. Why are we doing math here in science? But because they want to silo and compartmentalize the learning. If there is a way as a teacher to find that connection between all subjects and making those connections is so important for the students so that they're able to see and they're able to build on those skills that they're learning from those classes as individual classes, but then they're seeing the bigger picture. I think that's something that's going to be very helpful. So you can't just go into or have your students come into your class and say, hey guys, today we're going to do a STEM lesson, and that's it. But now what? You've got to design those experiences. You got to make those connections, and it just can't be something that just feels so forced, so robotic. There has to be a meaning to it. There has to be a purpose. There has to be that connection. And so I think that that's something that is very important to understand, and so I think oftentimes that's why we get the reactions that we may be getting in our classrooms or maybe even in our meetings as adults too as well. There has to be just a natural progression and there has to be a connection to all of the content and all of the context in order for our students to readily have kind of that attitude of, of learning that mindset of, okay, this makes sense now. I see that connection and go beyond just the lesson. And they can see how this is going to help me later on in my educational trajectory. How is this going to help build on for next year? How is this going to help me build towards the state test or towards my assignment this weekend? And so that's one thing that I really feel that would definitely help. Once you stop forcing it and just make it like, have it feel more natural and give it that flow, things will definitely get a lot better. So that's just kind of my thing there as far or best advice that I can give to teachers when it comes to making those connections and helping the students see that STEM just doesn't mean like, oh, great, just another science project or another technology use or engineering or math and things. But again, finding those connections, putting that reading, writing across curriculum, putting in that math, and again, going again and making those connections. Recently, I saw a TikTok video of a gentleman who works for the city and he has to put up, I believe it was like a signpost or something like that. And then he said, boy, those of you that always said that we would never use math in our days, let me show you how we're using math today. And he's showing how the measurement, he's showing the angles, he's showing the proper way of doing this. And all of a sudden I'm like, see, like the students will always say, well, I'm never going to need this when I get out of here, or when I'm a lot older. So it's important that we make those connections at such an early age. And again, it's just we ourselves as teachers too need to kind of step back a little bit because you are those learning engineers. So the more you build that rapport with your students, the more you get to know them, the more connection you make with them, you'll know exactly how it is that you will be able to present a lesson successfully so that the majority of the class is right along with you. And so when you have those students that are your tugboats that are kind of hard to move or not fully convinced, the majority will be able to help, your students to be able to see and be part of those lessons, which I think is something that is very important too as well, which is that connection. So the more things that you can connect in that network or in your personal learning family makes things so much easier.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's one of the things that I focused on throughout my teaching career and especially in my coaching piece in the last 3 years in the district was helping the adults in the room like break down those silos because it's a disservice to our students when we live in an incredibly interconnected world and most disciplines are interdisciplinary in nature. Like siloing it is doing all of it a disservice when we could be there's so much potential for us to exactly what you said, right? Switch hats from I'm not a teacher, I'm not just a facilitator, I'm a designer, I'm an instructional designer, I'm a learning engineer. Like I am bridging these pieces together to help my students realize we are in a very interconnected world. That's probably why I ended up falling in love with the science piece because science in itself is so interdisciplinary. I can easily tap into the math with the data. I can easily tap into the language arts with writing out my thinking, presenting orally my thinking, that science communication skill, right? So I'm so glad that you mentioned those examples. I think they're great ones for us to really think about that mindset shift, right? From that siloed teacher thinking to thinking about being an interdisciplinary teacher of instruction and helping our students design in the same format. So thank you for that. So I want to put AI in the hot seat for a second. So we know that AI has been all the rage for many, many years. We also know that, there's a lot of misunderstanding of AI is new since like 2022. We're not recognizing that it's an entire new generation of AI and generative AI, right, to support our instruction. But I want to shift gears and I want to think about something that I'm not hearing discussed enough, which is safety, ethics, and privacy. So how can we infuse the new generation of EdTech, which is revolving around AI, to help teachers support instruction, but also to help support students' development of digital and AI literacy as they continue in their paths?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. That's a question that I ask all my guests too, as far as, it's been, 4 years now, or going on 4 years since ChatGPT made its way on the scene. And the countless answers and are so different because even from one week to the next, there's something completely new. So I love that you're putting, AI in the hot seat because that's exactly where it should live and it should be from here on out. And not because it's necessarily shouldn't be used, but of course, there are many districts and that still have not, even to this day, formalized some sort of AI policy. There still hasn't been enough professional development because, as you know, Coral, you and I coming in from the K-12 space, every year there's a cadence that districts follow, beginning, middle, end of the year. And usually at the end of the year, it's going to be state testing. So what'll happen is, come summer PD, the conversation is going to be, okay, what are we going to do as far as AI and AI policy? You get those conversations going, but then the school year starts and all of a sudden it's like anybody that can be on a committee or planning or anything has other fish to fry because now it's the beginning of the year. You've got to get your beginning of the year onboarding, your PD and so on. Then there's that October slide. Then all of a sudden there's Christmas break. And guess what? Starting January, it's state testing season. And all those conversations and everything that was going as far as you moving forward, there's a full stop because that cadence needs to continue because there's other things that are more important. So one of the things that I do love though, that in and asking this is we need to be very ethical about this. Now, I will put my own self in the hot seat because back in, when I was still in the classroom, like 2016, maybe starting 2015 or so, when I first started going to conferences, learning about new tools, learning about new ed tech things, I would just come back immediately to my district. At that time, I had no idea what a CTO was and or who was in charge of anything or what. I was just like, okay, guys, this is what we're going to start using. I would log in, I would create accounts. And if my students didn't have accounts, we would create fake account. We would do whatever we could just to get that tech to be used. And I had no idea at that time of the wrong that I was doing because again, I didn't have that proper training. So imagine so much so this new tech came out real quick, real fast, and there isn't a tab that you can look at in now within our computers that doesn't have some sort of, AI component to it, whether it be generative AI or whatever it is. LLMs, teachers are using ChatGPT, they're using Claude, they're using Copilot, whatever the district may permit or whatever is open for them, they're using it. But it's all about how are we using it ethically. So my dissertation, it was called Beyond the Hype, Exploring the Practical Realities, Ethical Concerns, and Privacy Implications of AI in Education. And really what I found consistently throughout all the interviews that I did, which by the way, luckily I was able to use my podcast interviews. So I had founders, creators, practitioners, I had teachers there. But what I found most consistently here was that the educators that were doing the responsible work with AI were not the ones that adopted AI right off the bat and immediately. They were the ones that were asking the hard questions first. And that is something that I invite every teacher to do. Like that should be your posture, no matter how colorful the app looks, no matter how easy they make it sound as far as the user experience, the data, the dashboards, and all of these bells and whistles. We need to start asking ourselves and asking those hard questions and saying, how is this going to really help my students? A lot of them talk about, well, I'm going to be saving you time. I'm going to be doing, helping you with the grading, helping you with dashboards, helping you with this. But at the end of the day, is it really what you need? Is it really something that's going to be effective for our students? I would much rather have teachers kind of slow down a little bit more than some of those that are slowing down now. But there needs to be work done at the district level. And I think there's a lot of districts that are falling behind. There are several states right now that are also falling behind, that are not turning on anything at their districts, nothing whatsoever, regardless of them knowing that the student can use it at home or teachers might be able to use it at home, but they're not allowing it to be used in the classrooms. And I understand that, because that first layer should be that protection. And maybe they may be overprotecting, but they're still protecting. They want to find the details. They want to find all the little nuance. They want to read through those terms of service, because believe it or not, some of the most popular apps that are out there too as well, if you read their terms of service, if you click through them very carefully, there are certain things there and certain verbiage that we need to be very cautious on, and also be asking the hard questions to those platforms as far as, hey, where is my data being stored? If your data is not being stored in the US, that's already a red flag. And there are many platforms that are out there that do not store their data in the United States. So that just leaves you open for something big that may occur as far as data loss. Where is it going to end up? And how am I going to be able to retrieve that data? How am I going to make sure that my students are safe? And imagine, as a superintendent, as a director, if something happens, you're going to have to answer for that. And we can't forget about the case, with LAUSD and what happened with their chatbot. And now, of course, we see that their superintendent also is now under investigation. And there was a lot of things happening there, a lot of moving parts. So having that first layer being your protection is not bad at all. But that second layer, like I mentioned, should be that purpose. Is this a proven tool? Is there enough case studies? Is there enough data that truly demonstrates that I can use this, and I am definitely, or actually my students are going to be effective, if they're going to be able to grow? Because one thing to note also with a lot of platforms is, just because a student may be engaged, and engagement can mean many things. Engagement can be, well, I'm logged in and I'm scrolling and I'm clicking through all the wrong answers. So I'm engaged, for 30 minutes, but does it mean that I am growing? Does it mean that I'm really truly getting the remediation that I need? Or I'm just sitting there at the screen, just again, clicking through because the app is going to give me the answers anyway. And I just need to make sure that I fulfill my time of 30 minutes per subject per day. And that's it. So what is the purpose? Is this tool going to be able to help and demonstrate student growth, whether it be for my emergent bilingual students? Is the language going to improve? How am I going to measure those things? For science, how is this going to help my students do their research better? How is it going to help me as a teacher also take my lesson design to the next level and still help my students with whatever it is that they need to truly personalize this? And then the next thing, or the last thing I should say, is, what separates good EdTech integration from great EdTech integration? And that's the focus on AI literacy. So again, a lot of moving parts there. Definitely a lot of things to really think about and to unpack. But Coral, the truth of the matter is, like I mentioned, we are almost, this year's going by so fast. We're already going to be in April, and in a couple months later, it'll be 4 years since, generative AI popped onto the scene, and still schools are either not allowing it, they're not talking about it enough, they're not offering enough training for teachers, and they're not including the parents within those conversations. So there needs to be something where it's not only from the top down, but it's from the top down and out into our community as well, to make sure that we're making the best decisions for learning, for implementation, for child safety and data safety as well. So it's great that we talk about this, and like I said, it's great to put it in the hot seat. But of course, there are already plenty of apps that are out there that we're using and we're using currently. But it's just all about responsible use, and helping our students succeed with the ones that your district may have already approved, and making sure that you're using them effectively. Many times, again, and there's platforms out there that are specific to certain content, but if you don't use them, if you don't train the students to use them properly, what good is that going to do, and how is it going to help them grow? So the same thing with those generative AI platforms. If you're asking your teachers to use them, but you're not training them well enough to use them to explore everything and expand on everything that they're doing or what they say they can do, then how is that going to be effective? That's also, as far as fiscal irresponsibility, many times we buy just to buy and there isn't that follow up and that training. And then all of a sudden we just spent 300,000, maybe even more on a platform that we thought was going to be used, but it never really got used because there was never any follow through or any follow up with that. So a lot of things to unpack there, but that should be definitely a posture that we should have at every district. And these are the things that we really need to start looking into a lot now because the workforce it's changing dramatically day by day. And we want to make sure that we are equipping our students and teachers in to be able to help the growth continue, not just keep it in the K-12 space, but them being prepared for college, universities, trade schools, or the workforce of tomorrow.
So much gold in everything that you just shared. Truly, I was like, the whole time I was thinking, I was like, we could have done an entire episode on this topic, which I want to do an entire episode on this topic because as someone who dearly loves EdTech and that world, it's like I've been waiting to hear these conversations and actions being put in place because I know I went to an AI training about a year ago, and the first question I asked is, tell me about the privacy settings and where my data is going to be stored and like these conversations. They were like, "Oh, it's just one click of the button in settings." And all I could think is it shows how little of level of understanding of you have of artificial intelligence if you think that clicking one button is going to solve all of these privacy concerns. It's not. So I think it's so incredibly important that we continue to dive into this topic. So thank you for letting us at least hit that surface a little bit
Yeah.
today
I just want
with
to
our listeners.
I was going to say, I just want to add
Yep,
one more thing because
go for
I
it.
know oftentimes we talk about AI literacy, but I think that AI literacy should also include terms of privacy literacy because again, every single platform out there, like I mentioned, will tell you, oh no, this is safe. We don't share anything. We don't share any data. But if you go to the next section and further down and in smaller print, it'll say, oh, we actually connect to this and this and this and this. So there should definitely be AI, what it digital learning or digital literacy for AI policy. So I think that's something that's important for sure.
Yep, I agree. For our listeners, we will be sharing some of those additional resources in the show notes because there are places that really talk about implementing this at the district level and the campus level, and they do a good job of showing how do I research if this tool is actually doing what it says that it's going to do? Because just as a teacher user and from a district perspective, like it is important to see that we actually get results from where we're investing in to make sure that at the end of the day, we're focused on student learning to make sure that that actually does indeed happen with the tools that we put in place and supporting both our teachers and our students. So thank you for diving into that with me. So I have just one final question for you today. So I know you've made a shift recently to Cami, and I know that Cami has done a phenomenal job of focusing on inclusive instructional design and supporting students better access their learning. So we've been talking about science and we've been talking about STEM. Tell me a little bit about how Cami as a tool can support an educator or a student trying to focus on inclusive instructional design and helping all of our students learn in our classrooms.
Absolutely. So now, back in my day, aging myself in the classroom, it was very different from where I lived. Here in deep South Texas, actually, they call it the South Pole of Texas. So that'll be a reference for the city that I'm talking about, which is McAllen, Texas. But around McAllen, we're all like, we're separated by like one main street. So here, the predominant language that we would be getting in our district is definitely going to be Spanish speakers. However, while I was in the classroom, we started seeing an influx of Japanese, Korean. We started seeing what else? Japanese, Korean, Taiwanese, and a lot of students coming in with us not being able to help because we don't have that language support. So what I love about Cami is that it is able to help a teacher during that time to relieve some of that stress. Nowadays in the classrooms, you're going to have possibly 12 different reading levels. You're going to have maybe 5 or 6 different languages or some dialects included. So what I like about the platform, what I love about Cami is that it allows the teacher to really focus on that tier one instruction as the students are following along, whether it is a Google Doc, a Google Sheet, whether it's a PDF, whether it's a PowerPoint, anything that is a document can be uploaded into Kami, and it has translation tools, it has explain tools, it has summarize tools. And the beautiful part about it is instead of a student having to get pulled out to get that additional support, and we know that that could be, for a lot of students, especially in elementary, can be very embarrassing. Getting pulled out because you need that language support or you need that additional support due to remediation of some sort. You get pulled out, you're kind of singled out. And one of the things that I love about Cami is that as the teacher's doing their tier one, the student can have that exact same document, word for word, but they can re-level for themselves and they can use that tool and they can follow along and start making those connections. If I'm an emergent bilingual student, I can change that to Spanish. And now I'm kind of listening to the teacher, but following along in the same paragraphs. And I start making those connections. I've got my picture dictionary that is available to help me. I've got my annotation tools that I can go ahead and use and highlight and circle. I've got voice tools where I can leave voice notes. I have a screen recording where I can record and I can practice. So what I love about it is I liken it to like a Swiss Army knife. It has many tools that are going to help all students at all learning levels. So those that need those specific tools will use it. Those that don't won't have to, but they're there in case they need it. So that's the wonderful part about it, that it's really kind of like that co-teacher, co-creator, just kind of tool that is there to help our students in whatever learning capacity that they may need it and in whatever learning capacity they're coming into our classrooms. So that's really where I'm really passionate about the platform itself because of that, the growth that you're going to be able to see, those connections. Students can make those adjustments without anybody else even really, paying too much attention or too much mind to them because everybody's going to be focused on tier one instruction. The teacher can front load some of that work, or the students can work independently. And while they're working independently, they can use those tools. Everybody's learning. They're all on the same platform. They get to collaborate there as well. They can bring in their media. So as they've done their pictures for their science walk, they can all collaborate together on one science journal where they can go ahead and categorize their findings. They can work together. They can leave voice notes and they can even leave it in English or Spanish because it'll do a transcription and then it'll go ahead and translate exactly what it is that they said. So again, for me, that is something that I highly value. And I think just because of my background, growing up, not learning English until I was in second grade and being a language broker, I know how much of a struggle it could be to be at school and maybe just coming in fifth grade, brand new to the country, brand new to this district, and it could just feel overwhelming. But with Cami, that could put not only the teacher at ease and peace, because immediately Cami can help with the translation, with the summarizing, and help the teachers, but also for the student. It gives them that peace and ease that I'm getting the same instruction and I can easily translate it into the language that I feel comfortable with. And I get to use all those extra tools to personalize the learning for myself. So it gives the students the ability to kind of advocate for themselves in that sense because I've got the tools that I need to be successful. And that's what I love about Cami because not only will the student be successful, but also the teachers will be successful too in reaching all of the students, not just the first 2 rows in the front that are always raising their hands, but I'm talking about all of the students. And this includes that student, in the left corner in the back of the room that's often quiet and shy because they feel singled out. Now they don't have to be singled out. Everybody's working together and everybody gets the same lesson at their level, at their personalized level. And I think that's just something that's fantastic.
I couldn't agree more. I had so many chills with you giving so many of those examples because I think back to when I was a student and being that language broker that you talked about when new students that spoke only Spanish would come into our schools, me speaking both, like constantly being that translator since first grade, right, for other students. And then as a bilingual teacher in Texas, like constantly receiving newcomers and you're trying to focus on your tier one instruction, but you know that they're going to need more than their language partner next to them to support that facilitation. It just truly talks about when we talked earlier in this episode about how do I leverage technology to support me as an instructor and facilitator in this classroom? And how do I empower my students through the use of technology to access learning at the level that we're learning at today? That is the perfect example of how to weave in a tool to help us all get to the same page and to all be able to learn at the level that we want to teach, which is tier one instruction and in the language that we're teaching in, right? Which could be different than the language that is their first language. So, perfect example of how do we integrate, how do we leverage, and just some great information for teachers who may be looking for something to support them as we know that we constantly have a growing multilingual population of students across our country today. So, with that, I just want to say thank you again, Dr. Fonz. What a special full circle moment for me to just think about a few years ago getting to be a guest on your podcast, and today having the pleasure of inviting you onto my podcast as my interviewee. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with everyone today. I hope that we get a chance to do it again.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. And again, it's such an honor and a privilege to be here, and especially seeing the work that you do and the passion that you have for education, and to be able to be now part of your journey now as a podcaster too, as well as you are part of mine when you were on my episode. I think truly it is that full circle moment, but it's something that really for me, it's something that's truly special. And to be part of your project now, as far as your book and being part of these conversations, that is just an honor. So thank you so much for what you do, and I wish you the best, and just continue doing what you're doing because we need more passionate educators like yourself amplifying voices and just bringing us all together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fonz.